Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Matza, percussionist and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to join me in conversation with artists, friends, professionals, and experts in the music world. Today, I have the great opportunity and great pleasure of finally catching up with my good friend, Corky Laing. Corky, thank you so much for joining me on this one. It's been a while.
Wait a second. Okay, I'm in. It's a pleasure. Although it's over the years. We've been ships in the night and all that, but it's been good. It's good to catch up to you finally. It's my pleasure.
And let me ask you before we talk about this voyage, this journey that we all have our own journeys, but you had a really interesting one as well. Before talking about that, tell us a bit like the beginning, that first spark. Let's have a starting point, just historically and chronologically, perhaps. Like, how did that whole thing start with playing drums and then ending up with mountain? But start in the beginning.
Oh, you want that's like going that's we're going back to the pre-Civil War. That's way back. Montreal, way back in the day, we're talking about the late 50s. And my mother had all these records from Cuba. There was no problem with, the relationships with Canada and Cuba. So she would get these great, Latin percussion kind of records, vinyls that she would play in the kitchen while she's cooking. And I was right there. So I immediately got into, she started with the cha-cha. So she was into a lot of Latin dances. And my father, God bless him, and they would dance at night while the bedroom that my brothers and I lived in was next to it. So during the evening, I hear these great songs. And that started me off. And I said to my mom, I'd really love a set of bongos. And as it turned out, the years went on, I got a set of bongos when I was 11, 12 years old. And the bongos started, it was like a chick magnet. Although, when you took the bongos to the dances, in Montreal, the fry, whatever those dances were that they had on the weekends or the weekdays. And I noticed everybody, you had the girls on one side and the guys, there was no dancing really, but I would bring my bongos. And I remember Del Shannon had this song called Runaway. And it was a great song. And I played bongos at this dance. I would bring my, and it was, I hate to use the word chick, but the girls loved the bongos. How's that? So I realized then, the girls like drums. So to me, there was an ulterior motive there to get rid of all the whatever shyness there was going on in the room. The bongos broke any of that. I mean, let's put it this way. It worked. It went very well. And it's funny, you brought up Bill Buford, right? Before we were chatting. And the one quote, and I think it's accurate, that he said, sort of a philosophical thing, was in life, it's all about when you were born. And I went, that's pretty profound, Aldo. And it's funny because from there I took it, to be a teenager in the 50s was to be a nobody. To be a teenager in the 60s was to be an everybody, hence when you were born. So I'm digressing a bit because of the bongos. But needless to say, the bongos let me into playing. I got a snare drum. I had this, I had some friends that had some drums. I would borrow their kit. I couldn't afford a kit. A next door neighbor had a little drum set. So I would borrow and I would do everything I could to make friends in this point, high school. Anybody had a drum. And there was a guy named Barry something. He was like a takeoff of Gene Krupa. I got to think of his last name. It wasn't Barry Hart. It could have been Barry Hart. In those days, he'd go around to the high schools doing drum solos,
Wow.
and he came to West Hill High School. And I remember standing behind him going, wow. And talk about the girls loving it. He attracted, and he was really good. And I remember as time went on in high school, I had the balls to go up. He lived in Coaching Loop. And I remember taking a bus. I said, I'm going to try this. I go and I knock on his, it's Barry. And he says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, you can help Barry. Can I get a lesson from you? I'll pay you when I get a job." And he was a sweet guy. So he started showing me a little bit. Well, he was a soloist, but it really was very attractive. So these are the little elements that pushed me, and I honed in on the drum set, and then I ended up a couple of people in the band in the orchestra, the high school. They had this dance band. So there I was playing dance music, whatever, we're talking about old dances, whatever you call it. But I was playing in there, with the brass. It was pretty tired, but I did it anyways. And I would, in other words, anything I could do to drum, I would do. And that was the beginning of the, getting associated with the pulse, congas, snare drum, whatever. So that goes back into the 50s, into the early 60s. But that's the thing, to be a musician, you find out as you look around, you went, oh, wait a second. People, the musician thing is working. To be a musician at that point, you had a little bit of an edge. At first, it was the astronauts that were getting all the attention. I remember that. Oh, you
Right.
want to be an astronaut so everybody will notice you when you go up in space. No, it was the drumming. Anyway, so I don't know if that answers any kind of question, but
Oh, no,
that is
beautiful.
reminiscent of, because I know you've got some brilliant players that actually I remember crossing paths with them in Vermont, and it was great. And I've always loved the Latin feels, and I'm not saying I know it well, but I loved it, and I would interpret anything I could, and I always had a cowbell. Aldo, I always had, Aldo, you know it. You hear a cowbell, you're going to dance. It's the thing. Anytime a
Yeah,
cowbell, all of
yeah.
a sudden you start shaking it. And the cowbell was the very beginning when I went to Steve's Music downtown, and my uncle worked for him way down Notre Dame Street, and I bought a cowbell.
Who was your uncle?
Who was my uncle? Was Larry Schechter. Who was no Larry Schechter? Yeah, he was. I think
I know the name.
yeah, he was in the accounting, and it was great that he gave him a
Yeah, yeah,
job.
yeah.
Geez, I think it was Larry. No, it was fun. But I remember going in there, and a bass player of mine, a bass player that I work with, George Gardos, he went in to buy one of the big amps. He and I see, because he played bass in the orchestra in the West Hill High School, so he played the stand-up bass, right, the double bass. So we got
Right.
together in there. We do whatever we could to make noise, and and he introduced me to Steve's music, and I went there. I said, I better buy a cowbell. So I paid maybe $1.49 Canadian for a cowbell. That cowbell, although, is worth a lot more than $1.49 now.
So
That
that's the bell you used in
but yeah,
Mississippi
as
Queen?
that belt stayed, I
Yeah.
was like, I wore it around my neck. I took it everywhere. Yes, that's the cowbell. My son has it now. He takes. But I mean, I've had other cow. But it's just funny that the cowbell was sort of like became the symbol of that song, right? Because there's no
Sure.
other.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's cowbells in a lot of songs. As a matter of fact, Peter Chris. I'm fast forwarding. They had this thing called the Bonzo Bash in California, and a lot of drummers would go up and they were celebrating John Bonham's drumming. So they had this. It was during the NAM convention.
Sure. No, no, I remember. I was there a number of times,
Yeah,
yeah.
you know it. So they had this thing, and out of nowhere, um, Peter Chris comes out, and I sort of knew of him from Kiss and stuff. A bunch of drummers, all some great drummers. They're all there. They all played two songs. You were invited to play two Led Zeppelin songs, and I didn't know how to play like John Bonham, but I did what I could. The point is, they came out and they gave me this wonderful trophy. It was a beautiful trophy. The Bonzo Bash, uh, I don't know what that trophy or an honor. It was an honor. I was part of the master drummers for the Bonzo Bash. It was a surprise. But Peter Chris says to me, Corky says, on all the Kiss songs, I played a cowbell. You'll hear the cowbell in all the songs. Between you and I didn't know that much about the Kiss songs, but I went, great. I know I'm not getting publishing on it, but it's nice to hear. The point is, we became friends. but the cowbell became ubiquitous in a lot of songs. And I remember the Chambers Brothers had that song, Time Has Come Today, 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 Today. You remember that? And the
Yeah,
cowbell,
yeah, yeah.
it was the echo, echo. And I loved it. But the point is that when we were playing with Mountain, when again, fast forward to the early or late 60s, 69, 70, we're in the studio and it's so loud, although we have the Sun amps that Leslie was playing through and the Marshalls that Felix, we're talking about a lot of sonics. So I'm in this, you can't sort of go 1, 2, 3. There was no way of counting in the song. You didn't hear it. So I would hit the cowbell, kick, kick, kick. That worked. That anytime you want to set up the BPMs, bam, bam, bam. This is it, and it worked. So at the beginning of Mississippi Queen, we're trying how bam, 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 da na na na. Right? We went into the lick. That was great, and then we went to mix the song. And dig this. I'm going to digress another one. I've had 13 coffees now, Aldo, waiting for you. So I'm going
you
to
you
ramble on.
beat me.
I'm going to ramble on here. So who we're recording the Mississippi Queen at the record plant in New York, and beside us in the other studios, Jimi Hendrix was recording the Band of Gypsies. So we're back and forth. And anyways, Felix sends me next door to see if Jimi Hendrix would want to come in and hear Mississippi Queen because it was the final mix on the final song on the mountain climbing record. So I go on a brain. Excuse me, Mr. Hendricks, would you like to join? He says, yeah. So he walks in, and needless to say, everybody in the studio is like, whoa, there he is, James Marshall Hendricks, and he's behind the board, and he's sitting with his head down, and we hit the button to play it, and everybody's waiting. Leslie, Felix, the engineer, we're waiting. What's it? Play the song, and he picks his head up at the end, and he goes, cool. That's all he said was cool. So we knew we had something there. That was our first opinion for the record came from him. Timely. But what happened is I said to Felix, so you're gonna, edit the cowbell out, right? We're just gonna start up, no, 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 no. And Felix looks at me and says, well, what do you think, Cork? I said, well, pretty good count. And we started playing the song live, so I didn't have to scream it out. 1, 2, it was like, in other words, it served the purpose, the cowbell.
Right, right.
So
Yeah.
the point is that he didn't take it out. He kept the cowbell in there for the intro, which, hey, that's a beautiful moment because over the years, 40 years later, 50 years later, you hear the cowbell, people know the song. And
Yeah.
that's good.
But
That's good.
no, that's exactly like I mean, you remember Honky Tonk Women.
Yeah,
Once you hear the bell, you know the song.
that's right. That's right.
Same thing with Mississippi Queen, for sure.
Yeah. Actually, funny enough, Mississippi Queen became bigger than the band's name. Like, you ever hear Mountain? These new generations, maybe. You ever hear Mississippi Queen? Boom, they know the song. So, I mean, hey, you know what? It's a pleasure. It was a financial pleasure, and it worked, and I got lucky. I got lucky, which is great.
Well, I don't believe in luck. I don't believe in coincidences. Just so you know, I believe, like in this podcast, you shape your journey. I mean, you do certain things for reasons, things that push you. So, why did you, for example, you're in Montreal, and I had no idea you were so much into the Cuban music. I mean, I wrote a book on Cuban rhythms for percussion and drum set,
Right.
which is a method book, which is actually now accepted by the Ministry of Culture in Cuba for their music schools, which
Good
is
for you.
amazing. But and I've been going down to Cuba. In fact, I just came back. I was there for a month doing our Cosa Cuba workshop down there, and we take groups down to perform. So I'm like there a lot, but I had no idea you had that history of this music. Had I known, I would have pulled you into other stuff,
Well,
which would have been
I
nice.
remember we had that get together, and it was like in heaven. You had all these percussionists here from Cuba. It was beautiful to me. It was like,
Yeah,
wow, I didn't know that
yeah. The
was going
Cuba,
on either.
the Cosa workshop. Yeah, the one you came out to the one in Vermont.
That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I remember Vinny, you had Vinny Appici there for that one too. Carmine's brother, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, we were both looking at each other, going, "Shit! I wish we could play like this." That's a whole different pulse, you know. But it's amazing what the amazing. It's just amazing how many different feels there are for the same feel. You know, I don't know if that makes sense, but
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
it just all works in terms of, you know, you can't just play a cowbell to a conga. There's a whole thing. Yeah, and the timbales. I bought timbales for my first drum set because I couldn't afford the tom toms, and of course I played in that dance band, so I had to. Here I am setting up for our first mountain recording, and guess what I have? I got the timbales. And
Timbales.
Felix looked at me and says, "What's this?" I said, "Well, Felix, I couldn't afford it. I didn't have a whole set. I had the snare drum separately, Rogers bass drum. It was all. It was just it was just a bastardized size of as a drum set. I don't even know how to describe it. The point is they had the timbales and the cowbell. I said, Felix, I used to do a lot of this, and when you play bar mitzvahs, sweet 16s, and weddings, and you have to play dance music. And I said, Felix, every time you have a timbale and a cowbell, people dance. I love it. If you don't dance to a drummer, give it up. You know, go play violin. The point is, this is the funny part, although over the years, because I used these metal drums and the metal cowbell, Mountain became known in Europe as a heavy metal band because, you know, I was using. I never put that together, but there's a magazine called Karam or Kareem, or it's a big heavy. And we were like, I said to Leslie at the time, "What's this?" I guess they like your drum, you like cowbell. I guess they timbale. Fuck it, yeah, they love it. Call it what they want. The point is, it's just funny the way. And I have to say, I don't want to get into this argument, but I do believe a good deal of what goes on is luck. That's a four-letter word. So you and I can talk about this later. And I see where you're coming from, you know. But in order to get to where you are, what you're talking about, when you sit down, you take moments and you work on moment by moment to build whatever you're building. Those moments are luck too. It's all a time and place. But we can discuss this later on. We need a few days on that one. Go ahead,
Oh, yes,
carry
yes.
on. I'm sorry, Mitch.
No, but no, but you're right. But there's a decision there. Okay, so the fact that you made a decision to do one thing and not another led you to that place. So, I mean, you were in Montreal for a long time, and a place like Steve's was like our center here in
That's
Montreal.
right.
Everybody
Right.
still goes there, and guys, I mean, they're great people like Lenny and all those people at the shop. And one day, I actually met Steve himself.
Right.
I was flying to Toronto for something, and I happened to be sitting beside him. I'm on the plane. I look over, and it's Steve Kermit from, the owner of Steve's, because they had three stores: Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal,
This
right?
goes back to the one store, though. We're going back to the 50s now, late 50s.
Oh, they had one. Okay, but later on, I'm,
Go
I'm
ahead.
talking about
Yeah.
fast forward later. But
Yeah.
he was a guy. I mean, it's impossible to meet the actual owner, and he was like God here. He started everything. Him and a
Yeah.
couple of other people in
That's
town,
right.
right? And so I'm sitting beside him, and there's no way you can get a meeting with him. So I jokingly said to him, "So I guess you're wondering why I called this meeting." He looked at me.
It became
He
a
knew who.
meeting. It became a
Yeah,
meeting.
yeah. No, he knew who I was.
Yeah.
So he starts laughing, and I said, "I'm just joking, of course." So we just chat up. But there are people like that, and the fact that you take a decision to do certain things lead you to something else. That's all I'm saying. So when you were here and decided to move to New York, how did that come about?
Well, the band that I had in Canada went through a few changes. There was Bartholomew Plus Three, which was at the same stage as JB and the Playboys. You may remember all those, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
Haunted and the Rabble. And in any case, that was the early 60s. And what happened is we had a friend, well, the keyboard player Gary Shipp's brother was Neil Shipp, and he changed his name to Neil Shepherd. And he happened to be playing in this doo-wop band called The Happenings in New York. So he had contacts in New York. And he said, "Why don't we get you guys down to New York to play it?" We loved it. The idea, there weren't that many Canadian bands that cared about getting over the border. You know, there was Neil Young, Joni Mitchell. Though they were up, way up north. They wanted to get to America. I personally really thought it'd be a great idea. So he got us visas to go. And the first place we played was the Peppermint Lounge. And that was quite a scene because we're talking about 60, 63, 65. I'm 15, 16 years old. I can't even get what they call a license to play, but somehow there we are at the Peppermint Lounge. And there was a band from Toronto, an R&B band. I can't think of it now. They were playing right next door. There was discos in those days, although. And what happened? I ended up in New York playing at a couple of these clubs in the summertime. And then the guy that owned, I hope you're following me on that, although you may want to
Yeah.
take notes. The guy that owned the club, he had a club in the Hamptons on the beach. It was called Tiana Beach Club. At the time, coincidentally, the band called the Young Rascals were playing across the street at a place called The Barge, right there on the Intercoastal. And this was, yeah, 64, 65. And this is the summertime. So I loved that we were going to the beach. And in those days, although, because it was the Vietnam War, a lot of our contemporaries were being drafted. So you had all these girls, and I'm talking about a lot of girls who had no boyfriends because they were overseas and they were lonely. So on that front, it worked out quite well for the boys from Canada. The only
You
thing
made a lot of music.
Yes, the only thing we knew from the draft was open windows in New York. That's a draft. The point is, that's where I met Leslie West. He was he
Nice,
was in a
nice.
band called the Vagrants, and we were replacing them in this particular club called the Tiana Beach Club, and that's where I met Leslie. Coincidentally, he was being produced. The Vagrants were being produced by Felix Pappalardi. He became the glue. Felix was also attempting to produce our band. At the time, we had changed it. Well, Bartha, we did a song called When I Fall in Love, an old Nat King Cole song. The head of Atlanta wanted to audition Felix Pappalardi. He says, well, go ahead, take a young band from wherever and see how you could make When I Fall in Love. One of his favorites is Arif Martin. Yeah, the guy from Atlantic Records. And so Felix was, I hope you're keeping track, although Felix
Yes, yes, I
was
am.
producing Leslie, he was producing me. And then the band called Cream came along. And that's when he bolted from both of us and went to produce Cream in 11 days. He did Israeli Gears. This was all happening in that year. Now we're into 67, 68, maybe even 60 or 69. So everything was coming together in New York at that time. So I ended up playing a lot of beach clubs. During the summers, I would go to Nantucket and play. I love the beach. And so did the band. So it was a great time. We were able to get into the States to play these beaches, these beach clubs. And yeah, a lot of was happening. And in those days, when you played clubs, I'm sure you know this, Aldo, you had to play like 6 40-minute sets. You know,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
there was no one or two shows. You got in there at 8 and you were out of there at 4 in the morning. You
Yeah.
had your chops together or coming together. So that's how I got into the States
Yeah.
through a combination of things. And again, do you remember The Apprenticeship of Diddy Kravitz? Remember the movie?
Of course, one of my favorites
So do you
with
remember?
Mordecai Richler.
Yeah,
Yes.
one of my favorite writers. The point, this is true. I'm serious as a heart attack. The guy that played the heavy, Harry Ship. There's a heavy that Richard Dreyfuss was. He scared everybody. The heavy in
Right.
that movie was Harry Ship.
Wow.
Was our keyboard player's father, and we used to rehearse in Coat St. Luke. And I'm not giving anything away here. Downstairs, and Harry would come downstairs. He'd limp across behind a painting, and he'd limp because they warned him that somebody put a shot in his leg because they were it was a warning amongst those particular good guys,
Right,
Anyway,
right.
so he goes in, we're playing, and he says, sorry, boys, I just have to do. He takes the painting off the wall, and there's a safe there. He opens up the safe, and he's pulling out wads of cash. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? Turns out, again, I found out later that he was opening up a casino on the St. Lawrence River that he was running. And I guess people wanted to come in on it. The point being is that between Harry, Neil was also his son, so was Gary. So Neil and Gary, it was very helpful because Harry had some clout. I think he had something to do with getting the visas so quickly because in those days it wasn't that easy, to get across the border, especially if you're playing.
Right.
So I don't know if I'm rambling on too much.
No, no, no. You're making an interesting point because see, I grew up in Ottawa in the
Yeah.
'60s before coming to Montreal, so I didn't know the whole Montreal scene before coming here.
Mhm.
The only person I had heard of from here was actually Michel Pagliaro, but his English album, remember?
Yes.
Which was Some Sing, Some Dance that he did in Abbey Road album studios in England. But he had a whole other life in the French world. So when I later was recording with him, I'd say I didn't know you're that other guy because he had two personalities, a completely
Right.
French personality that I had no idea of, and the English guy that sounded like the Beatles
Right.
kind of production.
Right.
And then when I came here, I met people like Jerry Mercer and, all of those guys,
Uh,
and then started
that was
doing
April Wine, right? Yeah. Go
yes,
ahead. Yeah.
yes, yes. And then there was a lot going on in this city that I discovered. I came from Ottawa where, they were basically they would roll up the sidewalks at 6,
Yeah.
you know, and then I came here to this place where there was so much going on, and then I'm learning quickly about who's doing what, and then of course I started getting into the scene, doing TV shows and playing the clubs. I did my degrees here, so then it was. I mean, the rest is I did what I wanted to do.
Which is
But
a blessing. Yeah.
somebody like you and Jerry, by the way, was telling me about he went to New York and was working with Roy Buchanan or something. So there's some people doing this going down to New York, and at the time Canadians couldn't get a record contract,
Yeah.
back then. You remember that? And Pierre Trudeau Senior fixed that one where they brought in the 70% content, which
Yeah.
fixed everything, and now it's a different world. But back then, I mean, I had the distinct pleasure and honor of being refused after a producer came from Toronto. I was living in Ottawa. Our band was all originals. It took us to Toronto. We recorded this record. It was great. And then the record company says, "Oh, but they're from Canada." So that was the end of that story,
That's
you know.
weird because yeah, as things developed, you got immediately you got Canadian play, which was a benefit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That was great. Yeah. But it was I mean, the fact that you went down there and I mean, with people like and I remember growing up with the Rascals. I used to imitate Dino Danelli. My first, the person who did it for me was obviously Ringo Starr that night in that television show. The famous story. I'm I'm one of those, numbers. One of those people that was there that night. The next day, the world changed. But then Dino Danelli was the next guy, and all those guys were in New York, where you were
that's right. Well,
now.
yeah. Well, what happened? And I'm sorry to say, Dino just passed a couple of
Yeah.
months ago. They're doing a tribute to Dino, which, by the way, you could be invited to at the Cutting Room in New York City. They're doing a wonderful tribute to him. I think the Drum Channel's doing something with it. They are. Yeah, Dino. Dino, huge influence. He was the drummer's drummer, because it
Yep.
was beside. I mean, he laid down some of the best grooves because it wasn't just a show off. He was a great showman, but
Yeah.
let's put it this way: you danced to everything the Rascals played. It was
Beautiful
how many,
morning. Oh
I
yeah.
mean, Midnight Hour, all those songs, they're covers, but when the Rascals did it, Dino put it across. He had that bass drum that didn't stop. I remember big red, beautiful bass drum, and that thing, he had that face on him like he's going to kick ass, and he did. He was terrific. I'm glad you mentioned because yeah, we're going to go
No,
celebrate
he
him.
was a great one. Yeah.
Yeah,
But when you were in this whole mix, and that's a really interesting story when you're the guys from with Felix and all those people around, and this mix. It was like it was fluid what was going on, and everybody was involved in everybody else's project, and then things kind of developed from there.
Yeah,
And
that's exactly right. That's it. It was
and
it
then
was it was a wonderful. Yeah, it was a club. There keep it in mind in those days. That's when a lot of people were writing their own music. These were self produced, self written. This is when the band started focusing on what they wanted to do. They didn't have to cover a song. They could do their own thing. Of course, the FM radio helped it. It was an era, and that's sort of what I bring is if you were in that era, it was wonderful because you really didn't notice it. I remember uh, the Young Bloods had. Remember that? Come on, people now, smile on your breath.
yes,
Remember that? Felix
yeah, of
produced
course,
that record, but that came out after later on when at 4 o'clock in the morning in New York they had these ads for for African for feeding charities and stuff, and all the charity was run by the Jewish Congress or something. It was played every night this is after the Youngbloods had Grizzly Bear. So that became a hit record because of that underground, foreign people said, what a great song that is. And it became a hit 2 years after it was released. And that type of thing. I'm just emphasizing the fact that everybody was listening. They
yeah,
weren't just playing. They were musicians were listening to each other, whether you were a folky, whether you were rocking or a jazz. There was a lot of, I mean, you had Miles Davis, you had him, and, everybody, you're right. Everybody was mixing it together and they didn't get categorized at that time. You just played and whatever you made, it was music and it was wonderful because nobody says, well, he's like that. So I like this. And I have to tell you, fusion took off. God knows, I don't even know what fusion is anymore. It's like, but it's that kind of drumming with this kind of drumming with a little Latin and you dance, and people had a good time. They loved it, so it worked. And I'll say, people were listening in those days. They were listening to each other.
yeah.
Very important. Very important.
And also trying to be different from the
Yeah.
next. How could I do something different rather than just copy and be another one, another hamburger, let's say.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Keep in mind, you had the end of the '60s. You had Hendrix, you had Cream. I'm talking rock now, but you also had Miles Davis. His big record, and you had. I remember the Kensington Market came out. One of my favorite bands. They had a song called "And Violet's Knee," most unusual record, and Felix produced that. That turned us on. Felix somehow was connected. Felix Pappalardi is the one I'm talking about. He was connected because he played bass for Gordon Lightfoot and Ian and Sylvia. He played. He was in the Yorkville vibe. So that's how the Canadian thing, I guess, in his head, he felt comfortable with Canadians. So again, he came up to Canada to listen to Bartholomew Plus Three, and our keyboard player, again, a ship. He sounded like Gene Pitney. And Felix said, oh, he's got a good voice. Gary was a great singer. So he came down. Anyways, we recorded at the Atlantic Studios. And that's where I met Dino Danelli for the first time. And he was just becoming a big star, but he couldn't have been sweeter. I hung out for a bit. Then you had Tom Dow, like behind the board. And I didn't know until later on exactly what his story. We were very fortunate. And again, I bring in that 4-letter word, luck, because there we were. And then I find out, dig this, find out there was a big argument because there's no drum set on Groovin'. There's no drum set, it's congas.
I know.
And
It's just a tambourine, right?
yeah, that's it.
I remember
I
that. Yeah.
found out because I was on the road with Felix Cavalieri doing some sort of a hippie fest. I found out that that song was the only number one hit song without a drum set. I thought that was interesting. You know what I mean? Because all the other, we're talking about a number one song on the radio,
Sure. Yeah.
and this is in the midst of all these trios and heavy metal things. And it was
Was
fun.
that done on was that done on purpose?
I don't know. Who knows what that's about? I just know that Dino wasn't helping. I think I think Eddie played the congas on that. But you know what? Everything, they did fine. It's just funny that something like that would come up and you go, wow, that's pretty cool. I just want to say one of the opportunities I had when we were on the road doing this hippie fest, it was like celebration of Woodstock all around America way back. And Felix Cavaliere would come up and he'd have his drummer and he had the congas. And I said, Felix says, you want to play the, so there I am playing congas on grooving right out in the middle of like, and
Nice.
I'm feeling that I'm number one. That was great. That he allowed me to do that. And of course, coming from when you go back into the past, the bongos. It all comes around. There I am playing the bongos, the big bongos. So
Your
those were
wish came true.
okay. Yeah, exactly. It was fun. It
Nice.
was all fun. It was great. But drumming and the interaction with all these drummers and everybody's playing drums now. I'm thinking it used to be a lot of people own drums, but you go to an accountant's house, you go to an agent, whatever it's, you name it, doctors, they all have a drum set in their house now. It used to be a guitar, but now, not that they play that well, it's not any difference. They have a drum set because therapeutically, it works as long as you know you get into it. Even if you're a novice, just playing drums, trying to play drums. Let's take it back a couple of dBs. Trying to play drums is a wonderful wonder. I mean, you don't have to go to some sort of gym to do anything. They're right there, and you can really connect with a lot of things you can't believe are out there when you sit down behind a kit. Anyways, I'm going off on that because I
No, no, but no, you bring up a good point because it's absolutely true. I mean, we always speak about music being the universal language,
yeah,
but drumming is even more universal
exactly.
because
It's a very spiritual.
if you're
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, I mean, you've been, around a couple of times, like around the block a couple of times, and you've seen it in every single culture. And myself too, we'd show up in a place, whether it's in South Korea or India or anywhere,
yeah,
and all you have to do, you don't speak someone's language, you just play.
that's it.
Automatically, you have a conversation going,
Yeah,
and a good one. It's never an argument.
yeah.
Isn't that funny?
That's it. Well, we all have a heart. We all have a pulse. It's a matter of where we take it, and without getting too corny about it. The idea is nothing stops you as long as you have your pulse. You can do anything, and I can't tell you how many people come up and say, "So how do you do this?" Everybody wants the shortcut. I shouldn't say everybody. Yeah, everybody wants the shortcut to playing like that or playing like this. Anybody can play anything they want. I'm sure there's some sort of in another universe, some other way of doing things. But right now on this planet, this is the drums to me are the oldest instrument ever. It played for just when you were a caveman. That's the way you communicated. There's no secret, and this is a communication. That's all this is when it comes to trying to touch somebody. You know, I don't know if any drummer can make anybody cry. I'm just thinking of Roy Orbison. I don't know why. I'm just thinking of the song "Crying," and I'm thinking, I don't know, did
Alright.
I ever make it? Playing a drum solo and just cause somebody. No, there's no.
To cry,
There's,
I don't
there's, I
know.
don't think there's any of that in a drum field. I don't know.
Excited, perhaps?
Excited,
Feeling
yeah,
good,
that excited.
perhaps?
I'm talking about that kind of crying. That's good. I know that enthusiastic. Yeah, that's good. I'm just rambling. Carry on. What's another question? Do you have any?
Well, no, no, not a question, but something came to mind. You had, my good friend, who I knew years ago from university, Andy Dorschak. Uh, no, Ivan Dorschak, Men Without Hats.
Oh well,
Did
yeah.
you something with him?
Yeah, we did. When I was at Polygram, I was co-producing, executive producing his record. Not the first one, the second one, 21st Century Dance. Yeah, I go ahead. We were talking about Ivan.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, no, I was just curious because I saw that and I mean he's from Montreal also. And I found it really interesting because when that band took off, um, I was on tour with Repercussion, my percussion group, and we were on tour. And I remember he had been talking about this record that he was doing, and it didn't sound like there was something serious going on. All of a sudden, I'm touring around the world, and that's all I'm hearing is the Safety Dance
Yeah,
song. That's all you heard. And I came back to town, and all of a sudden, I'm seeing in the paper that they're playing the big arenas, like, overnight. I said, "Wow." I mean, it was like one of those things,
It
right?
was, yeah,
Just
it was. But they were signed on a business level, if I may digress. They were signed to a company in the States. And actually, I don't know if you remember the video, but they videoed that in Ireland. Watch this one. You ready? Stay with. There's a company called Kruger Lumber. It was a wood company, huge company.
oh, yeah,
They could
they're
have.
still
Judy
around.
Kruger went to school. I went to school with her, and it turns out that they filmed that video at her parents' Irish house up there, where they go around. They were tethered. Remember, they were tethered. It was very, very, very creative, and I remember that. And what happened is when they had safety dance, it was huge, but somehow the deal fell through in the States. So they came back to Canada, and Peter Erdman was running the company Polygram in Montreal. I came up there to somehow help as an A&R person in Montreal when they were on Côte de Liesse. And Peter Erdman says, I have your first job. You have to make Men Without Hats an AOR band. Right now, they're a pop band. In other words, a rock band, because that song was a pop record. I would love to have a song like that, but and it was like that was my job. That was my mission to get them. So I bought them all guitars. I just gave them a bunch of guitars because it was all keyboards at that point.
Right, of course, yeah,
I
yeah.
said, I figure if you're gonna rock, you got to have some guitars. So Ivan got the guitar. Ivan's a brilliant dude. You know, he's very
Yeah,
smart and very cool.
very,
His brother,
very.
runs a close second. But that point is they were quite something. And talk about sibling rivalry. But we won't go there. But the fact is, they did explode. And in those days, and I say those days, I would say the early '70s, a lot of bands had hit records before they were a band. You know what I'm saying? And it was all of a sudden the band takes the Left Bank is a perfect example. That
Yes.
number one record, and it was no band.
With the strings,
Yeah, I loved it.
Renee,
Walk Away Renee.
something
Yeah,
Rockaway Renee, right.
beautiful, beautiful record. The point is that when you think about it, they didn't follow it up because they became rock stars before they were a rock band. So the key thing to that is to maintain, get some sort of foundation. And that has to do with drumming. If you're going to become that kind of, if you're going to be in that rock format, you got to have the drumming and the bass got to be there. And you remember in the '60s, some of the electric bass came in. Remember? All of a sudden, there was electric bass. You could play as loud as you want on the drums because the bass player just turns it. I love that. And I think
Yeah,
that's when I became loud. That's all of a sudden I had the opportunity to play as loud as I could, which I did. And I think that helped me when I went into mountain because you know none of that was pretty. It was loud, and you had to be in shape in those days. You know, in terms as a drummer, and yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this conversation.
no, but you're right, 'cause it's funny, you just gave me this thought. I remember, I mean, I was playing in the rock bands in Ottawa, before coming here, I wanted to be a studio musician after that, and I really concentrated on, percussion, drumming, everything. I went crazy with this, but before that,
Did you
playing in
do
all the
the reading?
bands.
Did you do the reading part too? You know,
Oh, yeah, yeah, I have degrees in classical percussion performance, jazz performance degree, ethnology, music, ethnomusicology,
yeah.
in graduate studies. I mean, I went crazy and I was playing day and night and everything. So I would read shows cold. I was like, I was crazy and in everything. And I wanted to do it all. And I was practicing 8 hours a day because that's what I really wanted to do. And I did a lot of it, which is fantastic. But I remember, what you just said as the drummer, some of the guys, with their Marshall amps and everything, it was the loudest you can play, and you're always competing with the band, right? That's what you made me think of.
Oh, you're doing
You're
that.
competing with the band.
That's true. It was a fine competition in terms of playing
Yeah,
inside the song. you had to find the beat in the midst of the sonics, and it was quite something to do that because where is the song? Where is it? Is it on the bottom end of the record? Is it on the top end? I don't know if you've noticed this, but getting to know when I did have an opportunity, I was really lucky to go to England and hang over there with a lot of BJ Wilson, with Rick Lee, the drummers from at that time, and they played on top. I noticed that to where in American you had the backbeat, and in Memphis it would be like the snare drum would be a backbeat, and it would be a pubic hair behind the beat, just a fat back drum. Remember Al Jackson? And it was great.
Right.
That's where I started coming when I came. I got my snare drum. It was the fat back, zap, zap, zap. And then I went to England, and all of a sudden it was up on top. It was the cymbals. It was the percussive part on top. So it was kind of like when I was playing with Ian Hunter and Mick Ronson, it was a whole different vibe because I became a percussionist as opposed to a drummer. You know what I mean? There was all that different aspects. And I found that would be if there's any comparison to the English, because remember the British invasion and they came in, all of a sudden, the bottom end, or in America, well, I go to Dino Dinelli for the bottom end. I mean, that was keeping in mind that Dino was playing with the pedals, Felix was playing the pedals. So his bass drum had to serve up more than the average drummer at that point. They didn't have a bass player on stage. I think eventually
Oh,
they did, but Felix played it on his feet. So it's way down low. So he had to. I'm just sort of reminiscing about listening and trying to learn. And like you say, you hear these drummers. There was a place called the Esquire Ballroom in Montreal that I
yes.
used to sneak into. That's when they had a lot of the R&B artists. And I remember I was George and and the bar was like around this. It was like a semicircle bar, and the band was up on the bar, and the drummer was right there. So I was able to walk around, first of all, sneaking in, walk around the bar and watch the bass drum because that's when they were doing those triplets on the bass. The back and I'm looking at the bass drum and going, holy shit, I got to figure out how to do that because I was always using the double bass drum. So I bought a little bass drum and a big bass drum. So I had the two bass. So I never really worked my right foot until I saw that guy. I said, I have to do that. I have to learn how to. I never quite got the R&B thing the way I wanted it, but I did go the other way and started going with the heavy metal. It's just like I'm running from the law. It's running on the bass drums. So that was sort of one of the, if one of the. I just recall the different route I took in Montreal. But you said one thing, and you were right. You came from Ottawa. Montreal was stirring it up in those days. There were some great little clubs. They had the Black Bottom, which I had the opportunity to sneak into that place. And that's when Tony Williams was playing there with Larry on the keyboards. And yeah, that was a great little club. Again, I'll tell you what I did is I snuck around a lot. In other words, yeah, I didn't get caught. That was good. But the point
That's
is that those are the kind of things you hear about when actors sneaking, young kids sneaking into different theaters to see this or Broadway. In other words, you do have to sneak around. They're going to stop you. You have to be a certain age to absorb certain things. I wasn't drinking at that point, so it wasn't a big deal. But the Esquire Ballroom, that was an education. Those people were rocking, and yeah, and
No, I remember when I first moved here was to go to university, and when I came in, there were a whole number of jazz clubs and rock clubs. You had the Esquire was I think yeah it was around then, but you also had clubs like um, where was it that one
there.
Rising Sun, the Rising Sun on St. Catherine.
Okay.
And then there was another one in Old Montreal. Um, oh, there were a whole bunch where I saw Buddy Rich play with a quintet,
I think
and every
wasn't
week.
that the Metropolitan on St. Catherine? No, because I went
Yes,
to see. Was it? Yeah, it was Buddy Rich, and I'm not sure if it was what's his name on the piano. I'm getting New York mixed up with Montreal. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, there are so many venues where you could see people play. I mean, I would go out at least 2, 3 times a week just to go and hear people play everywhere. And then I started playing clubs myself, playing the shows, the cabarets. So you read down the shows, and they had these artists and new artists each week. So I was in a house band here, and then I would do a TV show on CBC, a regular TV show, and then running around with my group, and then everything else. We were just playing day and night. This was like a mini New York.
Yeah, it is.
you
It
know.
was. Well, that's very much so. Yeah, I remember Crescent. There was the Cellar Door down on. Well, there was just some great clubs. They weren't big. They were small clubs, but they took in different musicians to do what they were doing. Lehi was in Ottawa. Ottawa had the.
That's right.
Is that right? I got that. I'm having a brain fart up here going. You know.
Interesting you mentioned Le Hibou. It was I saw um the guy who was running that and is a good friend of mine. I'm trying to get him on this podcast because he was the guy that brought a lot of this music to Ottawa, Harvey Glatt.
Yeah, I remember Harvey. Yes, I do remember.
He's
Go
still
ahead.
he's still around. I spoke to him recently, but he brought in I didn't know him at the time. So a friend of mine would invite me and say, Aldo, you got to come see this band. So we go to Le Hibou, and it was weather report.
Yeah, that's
With
right.
Ayrto, Alphonse Mazon, and all their setup. I mean, they took half the room, right, of the club.
That's right. That was great. Exactly. I remember the club. Quickly, I got to tell you, that's when I had this band energy, and we were really getting three of us, just keyboard, bass, and guitar, and there was no guitar player in the band. And guess who comes to see Robbie Robertson? He didn't come to see us. He happened to be in Ottawa. His girlfriend lived there, and he came down. And after the show, he came over, and to me, that was Robbie. That was the band. That was
The band,
that
yes.
was just starting to happen, and I remember that. And then we're playing the Festival Express. Years, fast forward the Festival Express, and I go up to. I remember the band was. This is in Toronto. We're out talking. The catering. We're talking, and he comes over. He says, "Corky, you're playing with Mountain." I said, "Yeah, man." I was like, "You believe that, Robbie?" And I went, "Mountain." He looks at me. Well, what happened with the other band? They were really cool. So he planted that doubt right in my mind. Wait, that was my band, maybe. But he planted that doubt. It hurt, because I went, Jesus, maybe I should have stayed. He was the only person that said anything really positive about the energy. Anyway, so that the Hubu was that was one of the first places where you did. You had the freedom to do whatever you played, and they respected it. They didn't have televisions, and I hope I'm not sounding like an old fart, like from the old school. The point is, there's a lot of good things going on right now in Montreal. I was just there. So that's happening. You're there. It's just that I don't want to say like you do this reminiscing and then, oh, there they go again, those guys. And nothing was as good as it was.
Yes.
Nothing was as good as it was then. No, it was terrific then, and it's terrific now. You just have to search a little bit deeper now to find those. People are doing it in their houses, in their garage. You have to. It's a little more intimate now. In other words, it's not a marketing thing anymore. You have to, as an individual player, if you don't mind me recommending, is that as a musician, you have to find your own little niche. It's not going to be set up for you the way it was. Things have changed like everything, and not for the better, but it doesn't mean the best is in the past. Okay. The point is that there's some really good things going on, well, in drums in general. I just love the idea. I got to tell you quickly. I was in between. I was in Westport. I couldn't get arrested in the '80s, and I had the only thing to save me is real estate. I happened to invest in, and I got a real estate license. The reason why I brought that up is for about a year I was in real estate. So you go to different people's houses, that are on the market. They're selling. You got to go and look and see. Every house had a drum set. That's what I'm saying. What the hell is going on here? Here I have a real estate broker thinking, well, maybe I should go back and play drums again. But yeah, it's there, yeah, and they become available drums. Of course, the electric drums and digital drums and all of that. there's some really good shit happening. You know that, and it's good. You're happening, and that's good. That's good. Because you got a pulse, and I got a pulse.
Yeah.
You know,
No, no, absolutely. And the nice thing is, and for me, what's important is all of those of us who kind of grew up with it. And you said it really well in the beginning, being born at a specific time, which changes everything.
that's it.
So in my case, I know I am so happy to have been born where I was born and when I was born, because there's a history that you were part of, but I mean, for someone else, it's something else, but it's a book. It's a complete book. You can laugh about it.
Well, that no, but exactly that's the Buddhist thing. It's funny that we started off with Bill Buford because I never forget that. It was to me, it is. It's that window of when whoever your God of your choice is puts you on the planet to take whatever you want to call a journey or route you want to take, whatever crossroads, whatever fork in the road you're going to take. You have the chance to do it, and it's just that's how profound it is. It's just as well when you were born, and what are you gonna do with that particular window in your life? And it's kind of exciting. It really is exciting, and people say, well, it's hard. It's this. Would you do? It's pretty straight ahead. Just make the right decisions for the right reasons. And I think the right reasons, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree, do what makes you feel the best. You may not make the best money, but if that's the case, go into the banking thing. If you want to make money, but music, God bless us that we have the opportunity. Look, you got a beautiful studio there with the drums. You walk in, and and I know every drum set is more beautiful than the next. My
Sure.
mother, my mother told me we went shopping because he was going to. I got my bursary for Sir George Williams. I had like $1,800, and I said to my mom, "Can I buy a drum set? Because this is my opportunity to actually." She said, "Lori, yeah, go." She came with me. She walked in, Steve's again, and we looked at. She said, "Lori, I can't believe how beautiful these kids are. How do you choose?" And I said, whatever's the shiniest. I want the silver sparkle. The point is that as drummers and percussionists, I really think that's the extra edge that we are allowed to have. We are given this opportunity, or you screw it up and you go off time and you play badly, or you lock into a groove. And like you said, no matter where in the world you are, people know what a groove is. They know what their own. It's wonderful. It's just I'm getting corny now. I'm actually getting.
No, no.
I'm getting
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it's
I
like
see the conga drum right there, and I see your timbales, and it triggers.
drum set and everything.
It's all.
Vibes in the back,
Yeah.
everything. So it's like my family's with me at all times.
That's it. That's it. And yeah, exactly. And you can enjoy it at your place. You have that freedom. Here we go with politics. No, I got freedom. The drawing. Speaking of freedom, the only thing that happened very heavily in the '70s was the click track. You know,
Oh, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I remember you're talking about the studio thing, and I remember what do you call it? Hall and Oates were in the studio, and the engineer's a friend of mine. I couldn't get any work, and I said, can you speak to them about a click track? And they gave me this rolling drum machine. It sounded like 75 amazing Puerto Ricans playing at the same time. All this drum, I couldn't figure it out. And I remember I said to myself, I got to make a choice because he said, if you can learn this, you can do the session with Hall and Oates, at the time. And I said, I just, I can't be tethered. I realize that I can get time and I can play time, but when it comes to certain things, I realized my limitations. And I say that not so much that I can't do it, it's that I don't want to do it. As soon as that comes in your brain, it shuts down any opportunity. But yeah, it's wonderful to be a studio musician. I respect that very heavily. And I never really became a studio musician. And I was lucky enough to have musicians to go through my particular life with, whether it was, Jack and Felix or Noel Redding we were playing with. There were some great musicians, and they sort of stayed as a linear, symbiotically with what I was doing. So it worked out really
Sure.
well. I'm very thankful for that. And it's
No, no, absolutely, and it in many ways, it's not like the click track is like if you don't do this, you're nothing. No, no, absolutely not. I mean, the Beatles, the Stones, a lot of that music, Miles Davis, they did not record with a click track necessarily, because it was like a breathing organism that made this music,
that's right.
and if you
That's
put a click to
exactly
that,
that's
it
exactly
doesn't work. It doesn't.
yeah.
It doesn't make it. So it's a whole other world. Some it's good to click track it, but when we went, I remember in the '80s doing a lot of studio work with the click track, but it was a lot of disco stuff,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was just and everything was quantized. Everything was it just became nauseating, and I almost sold all my drums at one point because it was just too um too clinical, it was not fun anymore. It was just science. It wasn't even art anymore. So there was a point, and then Steve Gadd came along, and that kind of saved the way we played drums, the way we thought about things, and then we went to another direction, which was kind of saved me personally because I was ready to pack it in. If I have to do this one more time, I'm gonna, you know,
Well,
almost.
I'm glad you didn't. That's very good. But guys like Steve Gadd are very unique characters. They're very unique, and yeah, Jim Keltner. Those, and I'm sorry to say,
Yes.
our buddy Jim Gordon is not with us. I don't know if you remember Jim Gordon, but he was the drummer with Jim, and Joe Cockers and Mad Englishman. Remember that tour that he did?
Yes.
They had two drummers,
Yes.
and Jim Gordon was one of them. These guys were great session drummers. They still are. Well, at least the ones. And Bobby Caldwell, I don't know. I didn't know about him, but apparently he passed in the last couple of weeks or last couple of
Oh,
months.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
these what's happening, and that's why it's a wonderful thing to talk to you now because we could talk because we're here. But knock wood that we just you just keep on enjoying it and keep other people in mind. And it's the music that lives on. It's corny as
Absolutely. And
we'll be long gone, and they'll be saying, "Remember those percussionists? They couldn't shut up. I remember listening to that podcast. Those guys just kept on going. Yes,
No, I mean, it's interesting because it's learning the backstories of these things, and you and I mean, you before me, also having that experience of actually living on the ground, and this thing is in motion. You were there, I was there, but interesting things like um, some of these guys, like you watch Gad, you watch all of these people who are all your mentors, people you always look up to, even though they're not that much older than we are, really. Um, and then you want to have conversations with people who have done so much that you've been listening to. Alan White, for example, comes to mind with Yes, right?
yeah,
And
brilliant.
I had been invited to some drum festivals with him, and we worked together a couple of times, and we became friends. And I called upon him when I started this podcast, and I said it would be great to have you on this because I've seen you over time, and I know you played on John Lennon's Imagine, you played on a whole bunch of records, and now you've been with Yes for so long. So it's interesting to would be interesting to hear the back perspective on this, just to know about it. And we had scheduled him to do one, and the boy, I think a month before we were scheduled, he left us. So
Yeah, you,
that's sad. So we
were you aware how brilliant he was as a keyboard player?
no,
Oh,
I had no idea.
classical. You brought him up. There's not enough time to go over what this guy's about. He's sort of known for the John Lennon Karma fill. Remember that
Yeah.
that special fill? And he said, I remember because we did this drum thing, and I said, "I'm sure you've been asked about it." The first thing he says, "Please don't ask me," because he says, "I don't know what I did. It was one of those fills, that became ubiquitous for all drummers. How did they do? How did he do that?
Right.
But it's nice that you bring him up because he was with Yes, and Yes, there was a lot of bands a lot of musicians came out of Yes, a lot of some great players,
Yeah.
and Keeping in mind that, remember I was talking about the English players, the English drummers and how they play on top. And a lot of the I found out a good deal of the English players also played other instruments really well. You know, I mean, there's a guy like Stevie Winwood. He's an
Oh
amazing
yeah,
guitar player, but everybody thinks he's a keyboard player, right?
right.
And what happens is it's the commitment of certain musicians, and I don't just say over there, but there's a certain crew of them that are so committed to every aspect of a song, which is the whole thing. Why you become a great
Sure.
player is you get to respect the song, whatever's on your sheet or whatever's on the drum set. The respect, the commitment is everything. And it's like you just said, you 24/7, you're doing something on some piece of skin, you know. So as long as it's not porno.
Yes. No, but I had no idea that Alan White was a keyboard player. I
Well,
mean, you
he
have
played. All I could say is like, we were there and he started playing keyboards, and he was pretty. Yeah, he had it down. I mean, I don't know that he's the best, but somebody goes ahead and looks like they're very comfortable on an instrument. You're going, well, he plays it. It's the comfort zone that these guys had. I think in Canada, I'm going to bring this up. This could be total bullshit, but in Canada, because the nature of the weather in Canada, you had musicians who did nothing but play 24/7. You couldn't really go to the beach in Saskatoon. You know what I mean? So you ended up sitting
I
about,
know. Yes.
Neil Young, the musicians that were in Canada, they went to the States because all you could do, unless you're playing hockey, or skiing, of course, that would take you away from your instrument. But I have this theory that some of the best players are that way because that's the only thing they could do, at least for their amusement, if you know what I'm saying.
Interesting. Interesting. I never thought about it that way.
Well,
That's
I
an
mean,
interesting.
if you ask any of these guys, I've talked to quite a few of them, and what's his name from, Christ, I'm having a wall here. Bachman Turner Overdrive. What's his name? Randy.
Randy
Yeah,
Bachman,
well, of
yes.
course, he's living on the coast out there. But he talks about when he was up in, you're up in the woods. And when they talk about woodshedding,
And
they're really
w
talking about Canadian
oh, yeah, but
musicians.
you're talking Winnipeg -30 on a good day
Yeah,
in the
there you
winter.
go. Well, it's just the woodshedding, literally. You're in the freaking
Yeah.
woods, and I always figured it worked for me. But I love to skate, so I had other things going on. But in drumming, you have to stay in shape anyway, so physicality is a part of it. You have to have the head space, and you have to have the physical space, and it all works. And God knows, thankful it works. You know what I mean? Because we're talking
Yeah.
about it, so that's good.
Yeah. No, no, that's it. And talking about, Bachman, Randy Bachman, the Guess Who, he was the guitar player, of course. And the drummer in the Guess Who was Gary Peterson,
Yeah,
who was a jazz drummer. I remember watching them. They had all these big hits, but he was like a real jazz drummer and played jazz in a pop situation. And it was great, right? I always thought it was phenomenal.
yeah, yeah. He wasn't a heavy hitter. I know that. I remember
No,
saying. But keeping in mind, when you go back, what's his name? The Stones drummer. He was a jazz.
Charlie Watts. Yeah.
Yeah, Charlie was a jazz guy, but it made sense. You still had to have the swing and rock. You just still had to do it. And yeah, hold on one second.
Sure. No, but while you're doing that, I'm gonna just say that a lot of people don't realize when you listen to someone like Ringo himself, also, who's not associated with jazz really, but a lot of his stuff is swung. He's a swinging drummer, for lack of a better word. And Charlie, the same thing. If you really listen, he's got that in him. He's not playing Tony Williams, but he's hearing it,
Yeah, Tony
and it
Williams.
comes out in the playing.
Yeah. He with Tony Williams, I sat when we played at the Black Bottom in Montreal years back. The band the Energy Band, we opened for him. The promoter was nice enough to let us play because we were playing our own material. So for a week straight, I sat behind Tony Williams when he played the Black Bottom. It was really an education for me. But keeping in mind that I don't, did you ever hear Charlie's band? His big band is amazing. I
I have his recording. I have an LP.
Yeah, you got to listen to it. I'm the same way. I just only found out about a year or two. Beautiful recording. Big band,
Yeah.
really the real deal. Sounded like he knows exactly what's going on. Cheers, thank you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's
But tell me, just to change the subject, you because you came to Montreal after you had come to the COSA camps in Vermont. I remember you were doing a tour about you were doing the solo show, and I came out to see you when you did that. And then you also wrote a book,
right.
something about Sarah.
Yeah, you know what? Look at this promotion emotion here. Here we go.
No, but I'm
Go
curious that
figure. Go figure. Here it is. It's called Letters to Sarah. This is what I was telling you before about. It's sort of a memoir in Montreal because when I was on the road over the years, whether it was Carnegie Hall or it was Armpit, Nebraska, after the shows, you're in the hotel. So I used to write my mother a letters, postcards, whatever. Every over 30 odd years, I would write this letters, and because when you're alone in the hotel, that's it. You know, I would just whatever I was smoking, I said, "Let me write my mother." So she kept all these letters, and my partner Tuja Takala, who's the co-writer, actually she wrote most of it. She found these letters, and she said, "Why don't
wow.
we maybe try to maybe put it together as a book?" So the letters became, as we moved along, they became the points. We the letter, and then I describe around the letter. So this became Letters to Sarah, and this is very much what we're talking about for this podcast because yeah, because this became I did do a I called it the best seat in the house, where I had a couple of years where I just went and performed on my own, sort of storytelling. A lot of musicians are doing that now. It's great. You play and you talk a story about this and that. So I would talk about the book, and I think you were upstairs, downstairs. Is that where we met?
Upstairs, yes.
Upstairs.
The jazz club upstairs, which is actually downstairs.
Downstairs, yeah, they were
Yes.
that was a wonderful experience. I had worked with a couple of people that Bill Brownstein turned me on to. He was a very big supporter. A couple of writers who helped me write that particular show, and I went off script, and I don't know how I did it. I was so nervous because there's a big difference being up front on a stage than being in the back on the drum set. It's like 15,000 miles to come out front. That's why I respect a lot of lead singers, because going out there in front and being right there for the people is different than being in the back. You're sort of hidden, you can get away with stuff. So that was a nerve-wracking experience, but I had a great time doing it. And I played about 20 shows around New England, and I did a show over in the UK. And at the time and place, it was fun. It was fun to do it because people showed up and they were legitimately interested in saying, so what's it all about? Court, what happened? And you're not just going to talk about drugs or, snorting ants off a kitchen table with Ozzy. We don't talk about that. This is a story of a kid growing up and, stepping in a lot of poo poo, and it's good. It works. It did work for me, and God knows, I hope it works for any of your listeners. It's not easy, but nobody said it would be easy, but it could be a lot of fun. Aldo,
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of fun.
Well, when it's too easy, it's not as much fun. It's not as memorable also. And then to live to be able to talk about it and laugh about certain things, it's
Yes,
amazing.
yes,
And and also, I mean, for example, in your case, the cowbell, it's fun. This is a funny one. The cowbell represents so much, going back to your beginning here.
right,
And then mountain, which became like Mount Everest, really,
yeah,
and certainly in your life, and a lot of people, everybody knows the song. So when I'm mentioning your name to people, say Corky Laing, I say Mississippi Queen. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the cowbell,
yeah. Well,
the drummer.
I think the funny part about that is one of the first songs I wrote was going back to the mountain because I was in a band called Mountain and I came from Montreal, which is a mountain, so
That's right.
these things are, spiritually connecting in a way. But it's funny you mentioned that. Yes.
Yeah, well, it's part of
Things happen. Go ahead.
shaping your journey. You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. And it's yeah. And as long as I'm not called a survivor, I don't want to ever have that name. That says that I'm trying to do something I shouldn't do, and you live through it. That's good. No, things are good. Things are good, Aldo, and it's great to talk to you. And it's nice to reminisce. And again, I hope I don't sound like one of those guys. Well, it's the way it used to be. This is the good old days. No, Aldo, these are the good old days, right?
Yeah, and that's you mentioned it really well, and I'm glad you did because the present is important. I mean, the past is the past, but the present is important, like right now, right?
Yes, exactly. That's it.
And you're on it. You're still on it, and you're still playing. You're still
On
doing
the
it.
road. We're going we're going to Norway. I've never played Norway before, but I've been there with my girl, and it's an amazing place. Just the monumental fjords and stuff. Forget. I mean, there's places you see. This is where, on top of the fact that you love playing music, you're able to travel. And I know you travel, and I talk to you about your particular destinations, which I love to share. But it's great that we're able to travel and to experience all these things, because that's just icing on the cake. It really is. I mean, going these places, and I know you're going to some great places. You just bought a great place, so this is, listen, God bless you.
You mean our little paradise in Calabria? Oh,
Come
let's not
on,
talk
come
about
on.
it. I hear the food is good.
I'm just watching The Godfather for the 20th time. You know, Actually, here's something funny: is there's a show called The Making of The Godfather. It's called
Oh,
The Offer. It's on Netflix or one of the things.
okay.
It's called The Offer, and coincidentally, Mississippi Queen is played in.
No.
Well, somebody called me, and I went, "Great! There's another little hit." And you go for those things. And yeah, I just thought of it in Calabria. I think they go there in the movie. That's where they did some of the
Calabria.
filming.
I'll have to see this. I mean, I was born in Calabria and I was 9 when we came. And so with, traveling, not as a tourist, but traveling because of your work and what you continuously do, you wake up, whether it's your house here or somewhere there, it's you in a different place, but it's still you continuing this experience and more input all over the world.
Yeah.
And then getting back to your roots, really,
Well,
really.
God bless you. You're a teacher. You're an instructor, and you're passing it on. I think that's terrific, and you've been very consistent about that. I get you on email. I get a lot of the updates, and you're doing great. I love your hair too. Your hair looks
I still have it. And you too, that's
well.
good.
It's drying up as I'm looking at myself. It looks more like a broom than it does a hair, but it's good. Anyway, so things are good. I'm going to have something to eat. I'm having low blood sugar here.
Okay.
I will.
But listen, I let me just say this,
Go
that
ahead,
I'm
say that.
so happy that you not only agreed to do this, but that you're on and ready just to share all these stories and ideas and thoughts. Thank you so much for doing this, and as I always say, to be continued.
There you go. We'll go with that. I'll talk to you later. Thank you so much, and all the best to your wife and the rest of the crew there. All right.
Thank you, my friend.
Okay, take care. Bye bye now.